Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about bad habits. But if this is the first time you've ever heard of me, I'm Dr. Gretchen. I'm a physical therapist and a multiple sclerosis certified specialist. And I prioritize helping people with multiple sclerosis walk better and improve your daily activities, your functional activities, and hopefully make living with MS feel a little bit lighter. Let's go ahead and dive in. An appropriate amount of weight through your mobility aid is however much you need to use it safely and not any more than that. So more times than not, when you're putting too much weight through your mobility aid, you're really putting weight through your arm. You might even see muscles start to flex because you're putting so much weight through your arm. You might feel a lot of weight or pressure in your palm or your wrist. You might start having elbow injuries, shoulder injuries. Your neck might be really sore because you're putting a lot of weight through it. And often your body's forward or to the side, like this. So that's typically what it would look like. And the typical reasons, plural, are number one, if you're putting a lot of weight through it, or as I mentioned, slouching or hinging like this. One potential cause could be weakness on your backside, weak back muscles, weak glute muscles, weak hamstring muscles, weakness back here. A second potential cause could be tightness here, so tightness in your hip flexors. So we'd want to strengthen your backside so you can stand up and stretch the front. And I'll give you some examples, but stretch the front. If the front remains tight, you're going to stay like this no matter what. If the back remains weak, you're going to stay like this no matter what. So it's often a combination of the two. The third potential reason could be due to poor balance and poor weight shifting. So you're just putting a lot of weight on the cane because you don't have the balance, or the rollator, you don't have the balance to maintain a standing position with less weight through your arm. So let's go through a few examples on what this might look like. So for strengthening your glutes, one of my favorite examples is you could be holding onto a countertop or any sturdy surface with one leg behind you, and you're going to try to lift that leg. Your knee does not need to bend. You're just trying to lift your thigh backwards by using your glute, your butt muscles. You're not seeing any movement in your back. You're not doing this. It's just your leg only going back. And ideally you're seeing or feeling some muscles here working. So I'll show you from this side. So that's what it looks, or from the front. This is what it looks like. And you do the same thing on the other side. If that's too challenging, another great way that you can strengthen your glutes via a seated option is sitting down, feet together and knees together, and you're going to open your knees as wide as you can without letting your feet come apart. And the wider you go, the more you should feel your glute muscles tighten. And then you relax and close. And then open, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze those glutes, relax and close. So those are two of my favorite exercises for that. Now, your hip flexors, those were for strengthening the backside. We also mentioned you want to stretch the front. So one of my favorite stretches for stretching the front, never use a wheeled chair, it's just what I happen to have here, but you could use a countertop, something sturdy, is you're going to put one leg behind you and one leg in front and tuck your butt under. And when you do that, you should feel a stretch in the front of the leg that's behind you. So you should feel a stretch right there. If you don't, keep your butt tucked under while you try to straighten your knee. So you're doing both at the same time, and then you'll feel more of a stretch in the front. And of course, we do this on the other side as well. One leg back, I'll move my hands, tuck your butt under. And if you need to, try to straighten that back knee while keeping the butt tucked. And you'd hang out here, you'd feel that in the front. So that's a way where you can stretch the front. The last cause that we want to touch on is the balance and the weight shifting. So one of my favorite strategies to reduce the putting too much weight through your mobility aid, whether it's a rollator, a cane, whatever, is to practice putting less weight through the mobility aid. So if you normally, I want you to picture a body weight scale, the kind that you'd step on and it tells you how much you weigh. I want you to picture that underneath your cane or underneath your rollator. And think about it in terms of a percentage, maybe. So what percentage of your body weight would that scale say based on how much weight you're putting through your upper body? Would it say 100% of your body weight? Would it say 50%, 75? What number would that say? And the goal of this exercise is to get that scale, that imaginary scale, to say a lower number. Now, I'm not saying drastically lower. I'm not saying go from having 75% of your weight through the mobility aid to 10%, but it should be lower. So if you normally put 75% of your weight through your mobility aid, try to put 60% or 65%. Once that improves, you'd back off even more. You try to do 50%. And you're just holding this position, trying to put less weight through the mobility aid and just getting comfortable doing that. Once that becomes a bit easier, you can try to imagine yourself putting less weight through that aid as you're walking. So it's not just balancing, but while you're walking. Can the use of a walking stick help to correct some of the problems associated with putting too much weight on the cane or rollator? This is a great question. Another way that I hear this question when it's asked to me is, can the use of a walking stick or a higher mobility aid, like putting your cane up high or putting the rollator handles up high, will that help with putting too much weight through the mobility aid, or will that fix my posture? And at least in my experience, 95% of the time, the answer is no. That typically doesn't help, at least not for more than a few seconds. And the reason for that is because, so if I'm putting too much weight through my mobility aid, through my cane, because I don't have great balance, then, and therefore I can't take my weight off of the mobility aid because I'll feel unstable, then it doesn't matter how high your mobility aid is. Using an aid that's higher doesn't change the fact that balancing here makes you feel unsteady. So more often than not, you'll still, forget the canes here, you'll still be putting the same amount of weight through the cane, or if you put your rollator handles up higher, more likely than not, you'll still be putting a lot of weight through it because it hasn't changed the fact that your balance hasn't changed. It's still not great when you have more weight through your legs. So you have to train your muscles to be able to take on more weight through your legs through that weight shifting exercise. Similarly, the other question that I'm asked is, if I just raise my handles, is that can I walk better? Some people will tell you yes. And for those people that it's worked for, amazing. I'm really, really happy for you. But the majority of the people that I work with, if they were to raise their cane handle up higher, so maybe it's as tall as this, or they raise their rollator handles up higher, they think that they'll go from this posture to this posture just simply because their arms are up higher. And again, usually that doesn't happen, because if your arms are on handles down here due to tight muscles here and weakness here and down through the back side, then having your arm here doesn't change that you're still really tight here and weak here. So if that's the cause, if the cause is tightness and weakness, then raising your arms isn't really going to change your position. You need those muscles to get stronger and more flexible. What you might find is that you raise the handles and you notice, oh, look, I'm walking better, or standing better, but in 10 seconds, 30 seconds, you're going to start coming back to that same position due to the tightness and weakness. If you're someone who normally wall walks or furniture surfs and you're putting a lot of weight through furniture, one of the best strategies that I like to give is to stand close enough to the wall where you can use it if you need to. You can lightly touch, or you could do this if this was a sofa, you could touch the sofa. Stand close enough where you could touch it if you needed to, but practice not touching it or lightly touching it. So if you normally are heavily touching the walls, practice lightly, just fingerprints only as you're walking. So it's there, you're lightly touching it, and you're practicing not putting a lot of weight through your hands. Once that feels more comfortable, then progress to not touching at all, but hovering. So it's you're near the wall, but hover. So if you feel off balance, it's right there. You can still touch it, but practice not touching unless you need to. Once that feels more comfortable, and that might take weeks or months, but once that feels more comfortable, then practice taking a step away, just a small step. So it's still there if you need it, but you're not as close to the wall. And you can still have your hand out if you need to, but you're going to practice walking without touching. If you need to, if you lose your balance and you need to touch, go for it. Otherwise, don't touch. Once that becomes more comfortable, guess what? Another step away. Now, this might be a little too far away, so you should feel very confident by the time you get here that you don't need that, because you don't want to reach for something that's out of reach, and then you could fall towards it. So it's away from you, and you practice walking here. You could use a mobility aid as well. Once that feels comfortable, you practice walking here and then here, to the point where eventually you're walking in the middle of the room, because you've now trained your muscles to have the appropriate strength and balance to do that, but you're also training your brain that you don't require the need to touch something when you're walking. So again, it's a physical and a mental thing. And another reason that this can be a dangerous habit is because it's typically fine when you're in the comfort of your own home and you know exactly where things are and how far they are from other things. Like, you know where your couch is in relation to the wall. But it gets into tricky territory when you're not in your home. If you're at the doctor's office and you think, oh, I see that wall, I'm just going to touch it, but it was slightly further away than you thought, if your depth perception was off, that's not great. That can result in a trip or a fall. Or if you're at a friend's house or you're a relative's house and you see a table and you're like, oh, I'm going to put my hand on that, I need that for balance, and you didn't realize it was on wheels and it floats away from you and you fall. It becomes a really bad and scary habit in those situations. And so it's best to train yourself at home and out in the community to not utilize walls, furniture, or humans. And again, if you need to, you should be using a mobility aid instead. That might take a while. I just mentioned that progression pretty quickly. Each of those levels might take weeks or months. So we're looking at the long game here. We're not looking to make that entire progression within 30 days. It takes a while. And the longer you've been using furniture or walls, the longer it's going to take typically for you to progress through those variations. If I'm going to get out of the car and I'm using my arms to lift my leg, or if I'm getting in the car and I'm using my arms to lift my leg, again, that's not helping out our muscles. It's not helping out our brain, our neural pathways. So if I'm trying to get out of the car, here's what you need to do. Practice using your hip flexors, even if you know for certain that your hip flexors, that your leg is not going to lift. Even if you know that, still practice it. So if I'm trying to get out of the car, I'm still going to try. I'm sitting in the car. I'm going to try to lift my leg and then lower it. And lift, and you're practicing this marching exercise as an exercise, this marching movement to lift and down. If you can, Try to practice the exercise to lift and go out, lift and come in. Even if it's a mild lift, we're not looking for big movement here, but what can you do? Can you lift and move it at all? Lift and in. What that does is it allows your hip flexors to work. And even if they're not working, even if you go to lift your leg and nothing happens, at the very least, what's happening is your brain, if we had that MRI machine on your head while you're doing this in your car, your brain would light up knowing that there's effort being put in, like there's someone attempting to lift this muscle while I'm in the car. And your brain can start to associate the two, that I should use my hip flexors when I'm in the car to get in and out of the car. And so attempt to lift when you're sitting in the car. If you're on the outside of the car and you have to lift to get in, attempt to lift your leg using your muscles without just resorting to lifting. You can use your arms after you've tried, but the idea here is at least try first. Try to lift your leg before just resorting to using your arms, regardless of if you're in the car, if you're getting dressed. And any time that you use it, try to use those hip flexors first. That is one of the best ways, again, to not just physically see an improvement, but mentally as well. So much of bad habits and habits in general are mental too. We've associated patterns in our brain, and so these habits keep happening because of our brain thinking that we need to. So we need to stop that. Thanks for tuning in.